My husband told me he's been faking his job for 2 years while draining our savings and now wants me to support him until he finds himself. My name is Mireya, I'm 32, and I've been married to Graham for 5 years, we've been together almost 9, and I'm the one who handles the calendar stuff and the bills, not because I'm controlling, but because if I don't do it then it doesn't happen, and for most of our relationship that division felt fine. I was the steady one, he was the creative one, he brought energy, I brought structure. It worked until it didn't. Graham always said he hated being managed, he'd say it lightly, like a joke, but it was a real thing for him, so I tried to avoid nagging him about money and work because I didn't want to be the kind of spouse who hovers. He had what sounded like a decent job in operations at a regional shipping company, he had a routine, he left early, he came home tired, he complained about the same few people, he talked about projects in a way that sounded real, and I didn't have any reason to think it wasn't. We share a joint account for bills and savings, and we each have our own personal accounts for our own stuff, and we agreed on that early because it kept things simple. Our joint savings was our big focus. We were trying to buy a house, not a huge house, just something with a little yard and a garage, because we're sick of renting and we're sick of landlords acting like a broken appliance is a personality trait. So I started the mortgage pre-approval process, and it wasn't because I was trying to rush him, it was because we'd been talking about it for months and the rates were doing weird things and I wanted to see what we could realistically afford. The loan officer asked for the usual documents, pay stubs, tax returns, bank statements, and we provided everything. Graham didn't seem nervous. He handed me his pay stubs like it was nothing. He even joked that he should get a raise just for having his paperwork together for once. I uploaded the documents, the loan officer reviewed, and 2 days later she called, and her tone was polite but careful. She said she was having trouble verifying employment. She said sometimes the verification line is slow, and she asked if Graham had a direct contact in payroll, and I said not that I knew, and she asked if he could call his HR department to confirm his employment dates. I told her I'd talk to him, and I walked into the living room feeling annoyed at the inconvenience, because I assumed it was just bureaucracy. Graham was on the couch with his laptop open, and I told him the loan officer needed employment verification, and he didn't look up right away. He said okay, and he said he'd handle it, and his voice sounded normal, no panic, no hesitation. The next day the loan officer called me again, and this is where everything cracked. She asked me if Graham had called yet, and I said he probably did, and she said their verification team spoke to someone at the company, and the company said Graham was separated from employment 2 years ago, and she said it calmly like she was giving me neutral information, like she didn't realize she just threw a brick through my marriage. I told her she had the wrong person. I told her there's no way, and she said she double-checked the date of birth and the last 4 digits of his social security number, and she said she was sorry but that was what they reported, and she said the pay stubs we uploaded didn't match their system, and she said she needed to pause the loan process until we could clarify. I hung up and I just stood there holding my phone staring at the wall, and my first thought was identity theft, my first thought was someone used his info, my second thought was a clerical error, and my third thought was the one I didn't want, which was that he was lying. I walked back to Graham and told him what she said, and for a second he kept doing that thing where he acted like he didn't hear, like he was buying time. Then he laughed, just a short laugh, and he said that's impossible. Then he said the company is a mess. Then he said he'd call and fix it. I told him to call right now, not later, right now, and he looked at me like I was embarrassing him. Then he said okay, and he picked up his phone, and he stepped into the hallway, and I listened, and I didn't hear him speak like someone calling a workplace. I heard him say hello, then a long pause, then he said okay, then he ended the call, and he came back and told me nobody answered. I told him to try again, and he said he would, and then he didn't, and I could feel my mind starting to spin, because what person doesn't immediately fix a false employment claim when a mortgage depends on it? I asked him to show me his work portal on his phone, because he always claimed he could see his schedule and internal messages there, and he got defensive, and he said he didn't like being interrogated, and I told him I wasn't interrogating, I was trying to solve a problem, and he snapped that I was acting like he did something wrong. I told him the loan officer said his pay stubs didn't match, and he got weirdly calm. He sat down, he rubbed his face, and he said okay, and then he said he needed to tell me something, and my stomach tightened so hard I thought I might actually be sick. He told me he lost his job 2 years ago. He said it was sudden. He said there was a restructure. He said his role was eliminated, and he said he panicked. He said he didn't tell me because he didn't want to disappoint me, and he said he thought he'd find something fast and then it would be like it never happened. I didn't even respond at first, because my brain got stuck on 2 years, not 2 weeks, not 2 months, 2 years. I asked him how he left the house every day. I asked him where he went, and he shrugged like it wasn't important. He said he went places. He said he applied for jobs. He said he took walks. He said he sat in his car sometimes. He said he needed a routine so he didn't feel like a failure. I asked him how we paid bills, and he said he used severance at first, and then he used savings, and he said he thought he'd replace it once he got a job, and he said he didn't realize how fast it would go, and I asked him why I didn't notice the savings dropping, and he said he moved money around. He said he transferred small amounts so it wouldn't look like a huge chunk, and he said he paid certain things from his personal account sometimes to make it look normal. I asked him about the pay stubs, and he hesitated, then he said he made them. He said he found an old template from when he worked there and he updated it, and he said he needed them for paperwork sometimes. He said he did it to keep things smooth. I remember staring at him and asking if he hurt himself, because he was talking like this was a clever workaround, like he was describing how he fixed a leaky sink, not how he lied to my face every day for 2 years. He kept saying he didn't mean it to get this far. He kept saying he was going to tell me. He kept saying he just needed time. And then he said the line that made me feel like I was looking at a stranger. He said he wants me to support him until he finds himself. He said he's been burned out for years. He said he's tired of being in jobs that crush his soul. He said he realized he needs to figure out what he actually wants. He said he wants to explore creative work. And he said now that it's out, we can be a team and move forward. I asked him why he thought he deserved my support after lying, and he said because we're married. He said marriage is about sticking with someone through hard things, and I told him hard things are not the same as secret things, and he got irritated and said I'm making it about betrayal when it's about mental health and purpose, and I told him he can call it purpose if he wants, but he still drained our savings without telling me. Then I asked him what's left, and he looked away, and he said not much, and I walked to my laptop and opened our bank account, because I suddenly needed to see it with my eyes, and I saw our savings balance, and it was a number that didn't match my memory at all. It was low enough that my vision got fuzzy for a second. I asked him if he touched the emergency fund, and he said yes. He said he had to, and he said he'd put it back, and I asked him when, and he said when he gets a job, and I said you've had 2 years, and he said I know, and he said that's why he needs space to figure himself out, and I remember thinking he was using the consequences of his lie as proof that he needed freedom, which is backward in a way that made my head hurt. I asked him if we were behind on anything, because if the savings is gone then that means something got missed, and he told me the mortgage and the house plan is off obviously. Then he said there were some late payments but nothing serious, and I didn't believe him, so I started pulling credit reports, because I couldn't trust his summary of anything anymore. While I was doing that, he kept talking. He kept trying to sell me a future plan. He said he could do gig work. He said he could pick up contract projects. He said he just needs me to cover the basics for a little while. And he said once he gets his confidence back he'll be unstoppable. And he said it like he was asking for a sabbatical, not a bailout. The credit report showed 2 accounts I didn't recognize at first, not huge, but there, and one of them had late marks, and I asked him what they were, and he said he opened a card to cover expenses during a rough month, and he said he planned to close it, and I asked him why he didn't tell me, and he said because you would have freaked out, and I told him I'm freaking out now, so what did hiding it accomplish? He told me he didn't want to fight. He told me he just wanted me to understand, and I told him I understand perfectly. I told him he lied, he forged documents, and he drained our savings, and now he's asking for support like this is a normal phase. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything, I just told him I needed him out of the house for the night, because I couldn't stand looking at him, and he acted offended. He said why should he leave? He said it's his home too, and I told him I needed space, and he said fine, and he grabbed a backpack and left. And he didn't even pack like someone who was terrified of losing his marriage. He packed like someone going to crash somewhere for a weekend. I sat on the couch alone and kept opening bank statements, and the pattern was there. Steady withdrawals, transfers, little amounts that added up, and then bigger ones when the little ones weren't enough, and I kept thinking about every time I asked if we were on track, and he smiled and said yes, and I believed him. I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about the fake work routine, him leaving the house every morning, him coming home and asking about my day like we were equals, him acting tired like he had a real day, and now realizing he could have been anywhere, doing anything, and I wouldn't have known. In the morning he came back like nothing happened. He tried to make coffee, and I told him to stop, and he asked if we could talk, and I told him we already talked, and he said he needs me to calm down so we can make a plan, and I told him my plan is that I'm separating finances immediately, and his face changed, and he said I can't do that, and I told him I already did. I called the bank and removed his access to my personal account, and I was going to open a new account for my paycheck, and he stared at me like I was betraying him, like I was the villain for locking down my own money after he spent ours. He said I was abandoning him when he needed me, and I told him he abandoned honesty 2 years ago, and then he started crying, not loud, but tears, and he kept saying he didn't want to lose me, and he kept saying he did it because he was scared, and I told him fear doesn't give you permission to lie for 2 years, and he said it wasn't lying every day, it was just not telling. And that sentence alone made me realize we weren't even speaking the same language. Now I'm sitting here with a paused mortgage application, a drained savings account, a husband who wants support so he can find himself, and a whole marriage that feels like it might have been built on me not looking too closely, and I don't know what the right next step is, because if I stay and cover everything, I feel like I'm signing up to be used again, and if I leave, I feel like I'm detonating my life in a different way. Update, 9 days later. 9 days feels like nothing, but it feels like I've lived a year inside it, because once you realize someone can lie to your face for 2 years, every memory starts shifting, every detail becomes suspicious, and you start chasing proof even when you don't want to, because your body stops trusting your own judgment. The first thing I did after I posted was go to my credit union in person, not because I love sitting in a waiting area, but because I needed a person to look me in the eye and tell me what I could do. I brought my ID, I brought our account numbers, and I brought screenshots of transfers, and I told them my spouse had been moving money without my knowledge and I needed to protect my paycheck and prevent new withdrawals. They walked me through opening a new account in my name only, changing my direct deposit, and putting additional verification on any transfers from the joint account. They also told me something I didn't realize, which is that if both names are on the joint account, either person can still take what's in there unless there's a legal order, and hearing that made me feel nauseous, because it meant Graham could drain what little was left just because he felt entitled. So I moved fast. I paid the upcoming bills that were already scheduled, I set aside enough for rent and utilities, and then I moved the remaining joint funds into a separate account that required both of us to sign for withdrawals, which the credit union offered as a way to slow things down, and I told Graham what I did after it was already done, because I didn't want a negotiation, I wanted protection. Graham's reaction was predictable. He said I was treating him like an enemy, he said I was humiliating him, he said I was making him feel like a failure, and he kept trying to reframe it as me punishing him for struggling, and I kept saying the same thing, you hid the problem for 2 years and you used our savings to fund the lie. He also started trying to bargain with apologies. He told me he was going to start job searching seriously now. He told me he was going to be transparent. He told me he'd show me every bank login. And then he asked if I could give him an allowance. He used the word allowance. And I stared at him, because he was asking me for spending money like I was his parent. And he said he just needed something to get through the week while he figured things out. I asked him where his money went, because even if he'd drained savings, there should still be some logic. We don't live lavishly, we don't take fancy trips, we don't have expensive hobbies, we don't have kids, we should have been able to stretch. So I asked him what he spent on, and he got vague. He said gas, he said groceries, he said subscriptions, he said little things, and little things don't burn through what we had. So I did what I never thought I'd do in my own marriage. I pulled every statement from the last 2 years and went through it line by line, not for entertainment, not for revenge, because I needed to know if there was something worse hiding underneath, and what I found was a pattern that made my skin prickle. There were recurring charges to a place I didn't recognize, not a website, an actual location. It showed up as a monthly charge, and it wasn't cheap, it looked like a membership, and it had a suite number in the merchant name. When I asked Graham what it was, he hesitated, then he admitted it was a co-working space. He said he rented a desk, he said he needed somewhere to go during the day so he could keep his work routine, and he said it helped him apply for jobs and not feel trapped at home. And I asked him if he'd been paying for a desk for 2 years just to pretend he was employed, and he said not just to pretend, he said it kept him motivated. I asked him if he ever got a job offer in those 2 years, and he said he got close a few times, and I asked him to show me, and he said he didn't save everything, and that's when I realized the co-working desk wasn't about job searching, it was about maintaining the performance. Then I found something else. There were regular cash withdrawals that didn't match any bill, and they weren't small, and when I asked him about those, he said he needed cash sometimes, and I asked for what, and he got angry and said I'm interrogating him again, and I told him I'm not interrogating, I'm trying to understand what happened to our savings, and he snapped that the money is gone and my questions won't bring it back. That line made me go still, because it was the first time he said something that sounded like resignation instead of regret, like he'd already accepted the loss and wanted me to accept it too. The next escalation happened because the mailbox started filling up, and I realized I hadn't been checking physical mail carefully because most of our stuff is digital, and it turns out that was convenient for Graham, because the mail included 2 notices from a collection agency for a personal loan I didn't know existed, and the notices weren't in my name, they were in his, but the address was ours. When I confronted him about that, he admitted he took out a personal loan about a year ago. He said it was to cover a few months when he thought he was right about to land a job. He said he didn't tell me because he was embarrassed, and I asked him how he got approved with no job, and he said he used the fake pay stubs, and that sentence hit me harder than the original confession, because it meant he didn't just lie to me. He used his lie to pull in a lender, and now we were dealing with consequences beyond our household. I asked him if he used my information for anything, and he swore he didn't, and I'm not going to pretend I trusted him, so I froze my credit anyway, because at that point trusting him felt like a gamble I couldn't afford. He started acting like I was going too far. He said I was treating him like he was dangerous, and I told him he is dangerous to my financial stability, and he got quiet after that. Then he shifted back into that wounded tone and said he needs support. He said I'm making him feel like he's worthless. He said he can't job hunt if he's panicking. And he said if I could just cover things for a few months he could focus on healing and finding direction. I told him he had 2 years to find direction while I thought we were building a life, and he didn't like that. He told me I'm cruel. He told me I'm making it about me, and I told him it is about me, because I'm the person who's going to get dragged down with him if I don't protect myself. The biggest twist of the week wasn't the loan or the co-working desk, it was my tax paperwork, because I pulled our last 2 years of tax returns and looked closer than I ever have, and I realized Graham's supposed employer income didn't match any actual withholding documents. The returns had statements attached that looked official, but when I compared them to older years, the formatting was different, the numbers were rounded differently, and there was a line missing that used to always be there. I called the accountant who filed our taxes, because we use the same local accountant every year, and I asked if they could confirm where Graham's withholding documents came from, and the accountant said the documents were uploaded through our portal like normal, and the accountant assumed they were real, because why would a married couple upload fake tax documents? I asked if the accountant could see the upload history, and they could, and it showed Graham uploaded them from his device. And that's when I realized he wasn't just hiding unemployment, he was actively constructing paperwork to keep the lie moving through every system that touches your life, taxes, loans, mortgage, everything. I asked Graham that night if he forged tax documents too, and he didn't deny it. He looked exhausted, then he said he had to. He said if our taxes looked different I would have noticed, and he said he was protecting me from stress, and I told him that's not protection, that's control. And he got angry and told me I was twisting everything. At that point I stopped seeing him as someone in a temporary crisis, and I started seeing him as someone who will do whatever keeps him comfortable, including lying, forging, and draining us. I told him he needed to leave the apartment, not forever yet, but leave, because I couldn't work and sleep and function with him here spinning explanations, and he said he had nowhere to go, and I said he could go to his aunt's, because he's close with her and she lives across town, and he said he didn't want to involve her, and I told him he involved me for 2 years without my consent, so he can handle involving her now. He left the next morning with his backpack and a couple boxes of clothes, and he kept saying he loved me and he didn't want this to end, and I didn't say I love you back, because I didn't have it in me. I just stood there and waited until he was gone. Then I sat on the floor and started making a list in my head of everything I needed to lock down, not a cute list, a survival list, accounts, passwords, documents, credit. I also contacted the loan officer and told her the mortgage process was dead, and she sounded sympathetic, and she told me I should put a fraud alert on my credit, and I told her I already did, and then I sat there realizing that my graduation gift to myself, the house, was now replaced with a different project, which was untangling my life from a person who faked his for 2 years. Update 7 weeks later. Graham didn't magically wake up and become honest, he just shifted from lying about work to lying about effort, and I learned that the hard way over the last 7 weeks, because when you separate physically, the story doesn't end, it starts showing up through other channels, like paperwork, bills, and people calling you because your name is attached to something you didn't realize. After he moved to his aunt's, he started sending me messages through a shared calendar invite system we use, because I blocked his number for a few days just to get my head clear, and he used the calendar like it was a back door. He'd create events titled Talk Tonight, or Please Don't Ignore Me, or We Need to Discuss Our Future, and seeing those pop up on my phone made me feel like I couldn't even open my schedule without him pushing in, so I deleted the shared calendar entirely and created a new one, and I changed every password I could think of. I met with a lawyer, not to do a dramatic courtroom thing, but because I needed to know how to protect myself from debts he created, and how to legally separate finances, and the lawyer told me the basic truth that made me feel both relieved and sick, which is that marriage does not automatically make you responsible for every secret debt your spouse takes, but it can get messy depending on how accounts are titled and what the money was used for, and the lawyer told me the best way to stop future damage is to file for separation and get temporary orders in place. So I filed, and that wasn't a big emotional moment, it was me sitting in a plain office signing papers while my hands felt numb, and when Graham got served, he called his aunt's landline and left a message that sounded like he was auditioning for a victim role. He said I was abandoning him, he said I was attacking him when he was trying to heal, he said I was proving I never really loved him. His aunt, Maribel, called me after that, and she didn't yell, she sounded tired. She told me Graham had told her a watered-down version. He told her he lost his job recently and was embarrassed. He told her we were arguing about money. He did not tell her it was 2 years and forged documents, so I told her the truth, and there was a long pause. Then she said she wondered why he was leaving the house in a button-down every morning when he claimed he was job hunting, and she said she didn't push, because he kept acting like he was fine. Then she told me something I didn't expect. She told me Graham had been spending his days not job hunting, not fully. He was spending a lot of time at a rented workshop space, the kind where people can rent tools and benches, and he told her he was building something. He told her he was working on a product idea, and he told her once it launched we'd be set, and she said she thought it was a hobby. She didn't realize he was using it as his excuse to avoid regular employment. That explains some of the cash withdrawals, because the statements showed purchases at a supply counter that matched that type of space, and hearing it from Maribel made it real. He wasn't just hiding unemployment, he was using our savings to play inventor while I thought we were building a stable life. When I confronted Graham about the workshop, I didn't do it at home. I asked him to meet me at the state vehicle inspection station because my car needed to be inspected and it's a public place with cameras and people around, and I didn't want him showing up at my door and turning it into a scene, so he met me there, and he acted like it was a normal errand. While we were waiting, I told him I spoke to Maribel, and I told him I knew about the workshop, and he didn't look ashamed. He looked annoyed that I found out. He said he was trying to build something for us. He said he didn't want to be stuck in corporate life forever, and he said if I had believed in him, this could have been exciting. I told him belief doesn't replace honesty, and I told him he didn't get to spend our emergency fund to chase a dream while pretending he was employed, and he told me I was being narrow-minded. He told me I only respect traditional work, and he told me he needs a partner who supports his growth. Then he said he still wants me to support him until he finds himself, and he said it like it was a totally reasonable request, like the last 7 weeks didn't exist. I told him I filed for separation, and his face changed, and he started talking faster. He said that's extreme. He said we can fix this. He said he'll get a job now. He said he's learned his lesson. Then he asked me if I would drop the filing if he showed me his business plan. I told him no, and that's when he got angry, not loud, but sharp. He told me I'm trying to destroy him right when he's on the edge of success, and I told him he destroyed our savings while he was on the edge of success for 2 years, and he didn't have an answer for that. 2 days after that conversation, I got a call from our landlord, and my stomach flipped because I thought Graham had done something else, and it turns out he had. The landlord told me Graham called asking to be removed from the lease and asked if I could take over the full rent, and the landlord told him no changes would be made without both signatures, and the landlord called me to make sure I knew. That call made me realize Graham wasn't just lying, he was trying to force my hand financially, because if he could get himself off the lease, he'd be free of responsibility while I'd be stuck covering everything, and the fact he tried it without talking to me first told me he was still operating on the same principle as before: move first, explain later. I went to the leasing office the next day and signed a lease addendum removing him, but only after I renegotiated rent based on my income and extended the lease term so I could lock a stable payment. And that was one of the weirdest parts of all this. I felt more like an adult handling that paperwork than I did when I got married, because at least the landlord was straightforward, no hidden stories. Financially, the situation got uglier, because the personal loan I discovered earlier turned out to be larger than he originally admitted. He had only told me about one loan, but as soon as I filed for separation and pulled more documents, I found another loan account in his name, and it wasn't reported on the first credit pull because it was through a local finance company that reported late, and when it finally showed up it had missed payments, and the interest was brutal. When I told him about that, he tried to minimize it. He said it wasn't that much. Then he said it was for a short-term gap. Then he said he planned to pay it off with his product launch. And I asked him what the product even was. And he got vague again. He said it's not ready. He said I wouldn't understand. And he said he didn't want to share it with someone who doesn't believe in him, which felt like a punishment line. Around this time, the accountant who does our taxes contacted me and said they were concerned, because I asked them earlier about document uploads, and they reviewed the last filing and noticed inconsistencies, and they said if Graham provided false withholding documents, we may need to amend returns, and if we don't, it could become a bigger problem. And I felt this exhaustion settle into my bones because it meant the lie wasn't just emotional damage, it was going to keep reaching into practical life for a while. So I spent a weekend gathering everything and I filed taxes separately for the current year. I also started the amendment process for the prior year, and I'm not going to pretend it was clean. It was a lot of forms and a lot of waiting, and every time I had to type Graham's name, it made me feel like I was dragging a weight across paper. The social fallout hit too, because Graham started telling people his version. He told a few mutual friends that I kicked him out because he was going through burnout. He told them I didn't support his creative path. He told them I chose money over love. And one friend messaged me asking if I was being too harsh, and I realized Graham was still trying to use other people to pressure me. So I stopped responding to anything about it and told friends I wasn't discussing it. The unexpected part was Maribel stopped enabling him. She didn't throw him out overnight, but she set rules. She told him he needed to contribute. She told him he needed to be honest about his finances. And she told him he needed to stop treating her house like a hiding place. And Graham didn't like that. He told her she was taking my side, and Maribel told him she was taking reality's side. And hearing that made me respect her more than I ever expected to. Then Graham tried his last big push. He asked me to co-sign a small business loan. He said it would be in his name but he needed my credit profile to qualify. And when I said no, he told me that proves I never wanted him to succeed. And I told him no, it proves I learned from the last 2 years. And he hung up on me. And I sat there feeling this strange calm, because if he was still asking me to risk my credit after what he did, then he was never going to understand. At this point, I wasn't even deciding whether to forgive him. I was deciding whether to keep myself safe, and those are different decisions. And once I saw that clearly, a lot of the guilt drained out. Final update 8 months later. The clean ending is not that Graham suddenly apologized and became a different person. The clean ending is that the paperwork caught up, the accounts were separated, and the truth stopped being something I had to argue about, because it was documented everywhere it mattered. The separation became a divorce filing after the waiting period, and Graham tried to stall it at first. He kept claiming he wanted to reconcile, then he'd send a message about how I ruined his life, then he'd go back to saying he missed me, and I stopped responding unless it was about logistics, because every emotional conversation turned into him trying to rewrite what happened. Financially, the court ordered a division that reflected reality, which meant Graham kept the debts in his name that he took out without my knowledge, and I kept my accounts. The joint savings was already basically gone, but the order mattered because it prevented him from claiming I owed him ongoing support, and he tried. He actually tried to request spousal support, and the judge asked for documentation of his employment efforts and his income history, and he couldn't produce what he claimed. And that part ended quickly. The tax amendments went through, and that was one of the most stressful parts because it felt like I was paying for his lie with my time and my patience. But once it was resolved, it stopped hanging over my head like a threat, and I finally felt like my life belonged to me again. Graham eventually got a job, not his dream job, not some big creative launch, just a normal job with a normal paycheck, and I only know because his loan company attempted to garnish wages for the overdue accounts, and his aunt warned me that he was going to blame me for it, and he did. He sent me a message saying I turned everyone against him, and I didn't respond, because garnishment is not my doing, it's his consequence. Maribel returned a few boxes of my things that Graham had taken when he left, nothing irreplaceable, but it mattered to get them back, and she also handed me a folder of mail that had been delivered to her house under my name by mistake, and inside that folder was a letter Graham had drafted months earlier, addressed to me, where he tried to explain the lie as a personal journey, and he tried to frame my reaction as betrayal, and he never sent it, and I didn't read it fully. I glanced enough to see the tone, then I shredded it, because I didn't want his story living in my hands anymore. The mortgage dream didn't come back quickly, I won't pretend it did. My savings had to rebuild from scratch, and it was humbling to realize how much progress I thought we had made that was actually an illusion, but rebuilding alone felt cleaner than building on a lie. The last loose end was the co-working membership, because it kept charging for months even after he left, because it was attached to a card that was still linked to our old joint profile, and I had to prove to the co-working place that the payment method was no longer authorized, and they eventually removed it, and when the last charge stopped, it felt like a small door finally closing. Graham asked one more time for support, not money directly this time, but he asked if I would talk to him so he could get closure, and he said he needed me to acknowledge that he wasn't a bad person, and I told him I wasn't interested in managing his feelings, and I told him I hope he stays employed and pays his debts, and then I blocked the last remaining contact channel I had left open for logistics. The divorce was finalized on a weekday afternoon. I signed, he signed, the clerk stamped it, and I walked out of the building alone and sat in my car for a minute just breathing, not crying, not celebrating, just letting the fact settle that I no longer had to carry someone else's fake life on my back.